All right, we will get going. It is 6:01. So welcome everyone, and thank you for attending Hospice Simcoe's Dying Matters event titled Pregnancy and Infant Loss. I wanted to acknowledge that today is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Day, and it's a day that can be met with mixed emotions. This day was established to remember, celebrate, honor, and grieve the lives of children who never had the chance to be born or whose physical presence was brief. At 7 p.m. tonight, there will be a wave of light, so we'd like to invite you to join in with other families across the world and take part in the global wave of light. We invite you to light a candle and leave it burning for at least 1 hour to remember all babies that have died too soon. I also wanted to note that the PAIL network is conducted a virtual memorial ceremony at 6:45, followed by the International Wave of Light at 7 p.m. Candles will be lit during the ceremony to honor the babies we have lost through miscarriage, stillborn, medical termination, and infant death. They will gather on Zoom and will also live stream on the PAIL Network's private Facebook group. So again, you're welcome to open another screen, participate in both these events if you'd like. I have included the Zoom link as well as the password in the chat window. So if you're wanting to participate in that, and it also will be streamed on their private Facebook page. So our event, so this Dying Matters event is a little bit different than past events. It is now virtual, like most of the world. We're using a webinar set up through Zoom, meaning that you'll be able to see the panelists and the PowerPoint, but your own individual microphone and camera are off. So don't worry if your dog's barking, your phone's ringing, nobody will be able to see that. We will start our event with short presentations from our panelists. They will touch on topics such as pregnancy and infant loss research, personal experiences, and preparing for another pregnancy after a loss. We will then open it up to the community. So we encourage you to ask any questions you might have regarding this topic. Please ask your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen, and we will try our hardest to answer all questions before 8 o'clock. If we're unable to get to you, we will definitely touch base with you to answer your questions on a later date. We will also be using polls to evaluate the event. So it will pop up on your screen. It takes a couple seconds just to click your response. And we are actually going to do our first one right now, just to get a good understanding of who our participants are. So you should see that on your screen. So just click your answer. Perfect. All right, so it looks like the majority are individuals who have experienced a loss. So thank you for spending October 15th with us. This event is recorded, so anyone wanting a copy of this can access it after. We will also be putting it on our Hospice Simcoe YouTube channel if you're wanting to view it later. So we will get going. So we'll introduce you to our panel. So we have 4 amazing individuals here that will be talking about this topic. We have Michelle, who is the program manager of the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Network. We have Theresa and Mathew, who are the president and treasurer and founders of Bridget's Bunnies. And we have Trish Steele, who's a registered nurse and registered midwife, now retired, and also a Hospice Simcoe volunteer. So I'm going to pass it to you, Michelle.
Thank you, and thank you again for inviting me to be here with all of you tonight. I too am a bereaved mother. My husband and I lost our twins on August the 25th, 2005, the day before I turned 30. So that can tell you also how old I am, but certainly that we have a lot of mixed emotions that come with October 15th. It certainly is a day that we attach a lot of awareness with, that we really want to open this conversation. And so being able to be here with you tonight is a real privilege. So thank you again to Hospice Simcoe for shining a light and a virtual light on this topic tonight. So tonight what we'll be talking a little bit about, you can go to the next slide, Colleen, Our time together tonight will be a little bit about PAIL Network. So I'll be able to explain to you what our program is all about, what kinds of services we offer for families and for professionals. We'll talk a little bit about some of the unique care and grief needs of families who have experienced pregnancy loss, stillbirth, and infant loss. We'll talk a little bit about the resources that you can access through PAIL Network, both for professionals and for families who have experienced this loss, and learn how to make a referral to PAIL Network for families. So if you are a healthcare professional or you are a service professional who works with families, you can refer them for peer support after their pregnancy loss or their infant death. If you have hopes and expectations that you are looking forward to having met this evening, then please make a note of those, and I'll be more than happy to talk about those when we get to the Q&A section. So Pregnancy and Infant Loss Network, we've been around for over 25 years, and yet this has really only come to light very, very recently with the passing of Bill 141. Bill 141 is the Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness, Research and Care Act that was brought to legislation by MPP Mike Cole. We at PAIL Network were very fortunate to participate in the passing of this legislation that has been transformational for families in Ontario who have experienced this loss. Feeling that our provincial government has paid attention to what our needs are, to what our program needs are, to what our education needs are, is something that hasn't happened in any other province in Canada. Pregnancy and Infant Loss Support Network, offers peer-led support at no cost for any family in Ontario. Our program is fully funded by the Ministry of Health through a specific funding envelope that comes to Sunnybrook Hospital. We are part of Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre, but our program remains provincial, as is our mandate from the Ministry of Health. We offer loss-specific online support. And so those are groups that families can join that are specific to the type of loss that they've had. Our community-based circles of support are mixed loss groups. And up until the pandemic, they were offered in person. And now, as everything else, we've gone online with those as well, but maintain a regional approach so that families can network and meet with one another who've experienced similar types of losses in similar communities. We do have a one-to-one phone support program, and that's where families are able to be matched with a volunteer who's had a similar experience to theirs and receive 4 to 6 phone calls with an individual who can support them through this time in their lives. We recognize that being pregnant after an experience of loss can be an extremely stressful and anxiety-invoking experience that I know Trish will talk more about later. And PAIL Network recognizes this and offers pregnancy after loss support as well. Next slide, please. The second part of our program is the healthcare professional education. And currently what we have to offer is compassionate care workshops. So some of you may have spoken on a family panel. That's a big part of what we do in our compassionate care workshops. These are a one-day learning experience that are hosted in different communities. Again, now hosted virtually in different communities. And they're meant for professionals to learn the skills required to be able to offer that compassionate care to a family at the time of their loss or in the days immediately following. They're always taught in a dyad. PAIL Network feels strongly that family voice needs to be interwoven through all of our programs, including our education. And so this dyad consists of a nurse and of a family with a lived experience of loss, who are able to give their perspectives about this education. We have produced some videos that we'll be able to see later on if technology cooperates with us. And we've named these videos Helpful, Hurtful. And this is families' experiences that they can really talk about their healthcare, the impact that had on them, and what their provider was able to do with them that was helpful at the time of their loss. And in fact, some of the items that might have been hurtful for them at the time of their loss. The website section that we have for professionals, we're working really hard to make sure that it contains the most up-to-date evidence-based information so that professionals who care for families have a one-stop website where they can go and get really specific information that is Canadian content, references Ontario legislation, Ontario employment leave, for example, and is really able to help support families at the click of a button. We're involved in interprofessional education for medical students. So students who are coming into different medical professionals. Something that I think we don't talk about enough is how many different professionals families have to see during this loss journey once they experience that. When I think about my loss, I remember going to the emergency department first. And so there was all the staff there, then being transferred to a labor and delivery unit at my local hospital, then being moved by ambulance to one of the downtown Toronto hospitals, having ultrasound technicians, lab technicians. And so all of these students that are going into those professions, we're able to access some education for them and provide them with some perspectives about what their role would be on that interprofessional team once they start working. We also offer a monthly community of practice for health and service professionals. That's held on the third Wednesday of every month between 12 and 1. You can register for those as a professional on our website, and we often will have guest speakers come and talk about different provincial initiatives, talk about care for the caregiver. A lot of information is shared in those sessions, and a lot more importantly, a lot of networks are made between different professionals. Something that I think is common for families and is also common for healthcare professionals who work with families who experience this type of loss is there really is quite a siloed approach, and we're working hard to be able to communicate better, to be able to make sure that everyone is aware of what's happening in the province. There's excellent work being done, and we can make sure that families are offered a more equitable, consistent experience across the province. The last thing that we're working on there will be online modules. So we recognize that not all professionals are able to attend a full day workshop. And so we'll be looking at different aspects of those teachings and breaking them into smaller sections and having those modules available on our website with a goal of having them up by January. So check back on our website then. Next slide, please. We also offer printed resources that are available to order. We have PAIL Network brochures, and those are really important for health and service providers to have anywhere that families are, anywhere that families can experience this type of loss or know someone who's experienced this type of loss. And those are free to order. All of our resources come in the top 6 languages that are spoken in Ontario, and those include our booklets as well. We currently have 6 booklets: miscarriage, pregnancy after loss, supporting siblings, stillbirth, infant death, and the last one that we've just published that we're really proud of is Ending a Pregnancy. That talks a lot about very different ways that families have had to make that difficult choice. The online resources that we have are also translated into the top 6 languages in Ontario. And there's a section called Helping Others Understand Your Grief. And those resources were really written for families to be able to direct other people in their lives to understand more about what they might need from them, really kind of care for the grieving person. There's one for other family members, one for friends, one for employers, and one for coworkers. That really helps to give some guidance to them about how to really be present for the grieving family. We have an additional resource that is support for grandparents. And we've heard from many, many families that the grandparents are almost experiencing a dual loss as they grieve the grandchild that was supposed to be part of their family, and they watch their own child go through immeasurable pain. So again, all of those can be found on our website. For families, the booklets are free to order. You're always offered a booklet when you have requested support with PAIL Network, and professionals can order these booklets to have on hand to give to families at the time of their loss. Next slide, please. The other piece of work that PAIL Network does is the awareness and advocacy work. This legislation that passed in Ontario was in fact the first time that it had ever been brought to the provincial government, aside from making sure that October 15th was a day that's proclaimed in the province, which it is. But that was the only time that any of this information had ever come before the legislature. So when Mike Cole was able to put this legislation together, I actually met him. The picture that you see there of the CN Tower being lit in purple, that was at our Wave of Light event that we held there back in 2013. When I was hosting this, it was a very cold, a very rainy night, a lot like tonight. And as any other bereaved family will tell you, that when it's for your baby, the weather doesn't matter. You will go to be around other people who can share that experience with you. So there we all stood with our LED candles and our umbrellas held tight. And this man approached me who was wearing a black windbreaker and said, you know, you guys are doing some great work with the PAIL Network, but nobody knows about you. And I said, you're right. It's really difficult for us to make sure that families who have experienced this loss know that support is available. He said, there was something on the radio. Did you hear? I said, no, I didn't hear it on the radio, but we've gotten some really encouraging news. There's an MPP who's willing to help us. And he said, that's me. I'm Mike Cole. So to be able to really meet with him, to understand that this had touched his family in a very personal way, and that he was able to put forward this legislation that really brought this to the attention and got full House support. This bill was put before the legislature in October and was passed by December. That rarely happens with pieces of legislation, that they go from first reading to becoming law within a few months. And so we were very lucky to be part of that advocacy work. The advocacy continues both at the provincial and the national level. At the national level, we've been working hard with a minister in Alberta, in fact, who is looking at a motion called Motion 110. And this motion seeks to ensure that there aren't government policies that could further injure families after their loss. Families who have been asked to repay maternity or parental benefits, for example, after the baby has passed. We're really working to push for bereavement leave, where families would be able to access this by calling Service Canada and having someone who's trained in that specific type of leave benefit that families could speak to. The stories that we've heard from families, and that you've probably experienced yourselves, with trying to understand what leave do you qualify for, how can I get time off work, how am I going to be able to afford this if I don't have paid time from work. And bereavement leave typically is anywhere from 3 to 5 days. I think it's unreasonable to expect families who have lost their baby to be back at work 3 to 5 days later. And instead, families will use vacation time, sick time if they have it, and try and stretch that out. Sometimes families are able to go to their doctor, for example, and ask to be on stress leave or go off on a sick leave. But really, that's not what this is. You're not sick. You're grieving, and you deserve time to be able to grieve in a way that makes sense to you and that makes sense to your family, without feeling penalized financially and without threat of losing your job. So that advocacy work continues at the federal level. The other aspects that we really try hard to do is to hold events for families to come together. For families like mine, where we don't have a physical place to go to remember our twins, events like the family picnics that we offer, the candlelight memorial, a walk to remember, those kinds of events that we host in different parts of the province, are the only time that we're able to join with other people and remember our babies in a very physical way. I do have other children, and I remember bringing our 6-year-old to the butterfly picnic at that time that PAIL was offering. And he, on the drive home, asked me if all the other boys and girls there had babies who died too. And that was the first time that he had ever recognized that it wasn't just happening to us and to our family. So it means a lot for families to be able to look across this field and see hundreds of families that are experiencing the similar experience that they have also had. Next slide. So why is this important? I mean, I think knowing that most of us are lost families and some professionals here tonight, we know why it's important because we've experienced it. But for some people who really haven't had this experience, then they really don't know that as many as 1 in 4 pregnancies end in loss. Some of the other information that you see here on the slide was taken directly from IntelliHealth Ontario. And you can see here how many visits are recorded to emergency departments in Ontario that are specific to early pregnancy loss and complications. So this represents about 106 visits to emergency departments every day, or one family every 14 minutes. Next slide, please. In Canada, approximately 8 babies are stillborn every day, and 5 babies die within the first year after birth every day in Canada. That's 1 baby, 1 family every 2 hours. This is something that's happening far, far too often. We are, as a country, are not where we should be with reducing our stillbirth rates, and the attention needs to be paid. Next slide, please. So what about Ontario? You know, once we had this legislation that was passed and we lobbied for funding successfully, then we had this really unique opportunity to engage with families and healthcare professionals. There's no information published anywhere about what was needed to make a difference for families and to make a difference for healthcare professionals. And we had a mandate to expand our support and education from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. Next slide. So we did a couple of things. The first thing that we did was an online survey, and those survey questions were designed really to tell us more about the unique support needs of families who experience pregnancy and infant loss. This survey was just for families who have had a lived experience of loss. And we also wanted to get a sense of whether or not supports were being provided equitably across the province. What happens to a family in Toronto? Is that the same thing that happens to a family in Thunder Bay? Is that the same thing that happens to a family who lives in Timmins? As a provincial organization, there's a responsibility to ensure equitable access, and we really didn't have any information to help us do this. Next slide, please. So the highlights from this research that we were able to have published, one of the only research studies from Ontario, we asked families about their experience at the time of their pregnancy or infant loss. And these numbers are staggering. 53% of families who answered our survey said they did not feel that they were treated with kindness and respect at the time of their loss. 72% of families did not receive the information they needed from healthcare professionals, and 65% of families did not feel supported and cared for at the time of their loss. 45% of families were not told of available supports. 69% of families felt their healthcare provider did not have the skills to respond to their needs. And 51% of families experienced stigma from a healthcare provider at the time of their loss. So as professionals, this is absolutely difficult for us to understand when we hear from professionals that they're doing the very best work that they can do. And so what became clear to us was that there exists a gap between the intentionality of the care that's being provided by a professional and how that care is being experienced by a family. And so we set out to do even more consultation with families and educators, with healthcare professionals to better understand what can we do about this and how can we move forward from this. Next slide, please. What really came to be very clear to us that is one of the biggest gaps that we hear from families who experience a first or second trimester loss is that there's very little understanding about the weeks of gestation are not equivalent to the level of attachment that you're experiencing with this baby. And so families were presenting to emergency departments, newly pregnant and quite distraught because their attachment to this baby had already started. You know, in my case in particular, we experienced infertility challenges. And so we were very, very excited to be pregnant with twins, had already kind of gone forward into our future and thinking this Christmas will be the first Christmas that we'll have a baby. By this time next year, we'll have children in the home. I'll be pregnant at the same time as my best friend will be pregnant, and won't that be exciting? There's lots of attachment that begins to form. And so pregnancies are not just pregnancies. They're babies, and families have already built those attachments. And when that pregnancy is lost and that baby dies, what dies along with it are your hopes and dreams for the future. Next slide, please. So really the main themes in the responses were that families were not given information for follow-up. And something else that I like to highlight when we talk about this research study that we did was really how much information families wanted to give. We did have a couple of questions. So if you think about any survey that you've done in the past, you answer some questions, and then there might be an open text field where you can add additional information. And over 500 families added additional information because we don't get the chance to talk about this. There is no outlet for us to really describe this experience, and so describe it, they did. So when we looked at families not being given information for follow-up, what we decided to look at was the difference between a discharge from hospital, for example, after you've had a healthy delivery, and compare that to the discharge that you would experience after your baby has died. So when you're discharged after a healthy delivery, then there's teaching provided to you in the hospital prior to going home. Community supports like earlier centers, breastfeeding clinics are identified to you before you leave the hospital, and referrals are made for follow-up wherever indicated. When we contrast that with discharge after pregnancy and infant loss, families often leave the hospital very unsure about what the next steps will be. There are no community supports identified for families, as we saw in the research in 69% of the cases. And referrals might have been made for medical follow-up, but very rarely are referrals made for emotional follow-up. Next slide, please. The second theme that became clear to us was the quality of the family's experience with their healthcare providers. And that really, some of the things that came through was about how their loss was disclosed to them. So it was a big difference for families if their loss was disclosed to them in a private room, sitting with a physician or with their provider, versus being in a busy waiting room of an emergency department, perhaps with a curtain even that separates them from another family. What words are being used to discuss the loss. So are we using words like products of conception, abortion, or are we talking about a baby who has died? The words matter to families, and it's important to use the right ones and to mirror the family's language. When the family discusses this loss, are they talking about a baby, or are they talking about a pregnancy? And those are often cues for us to follow when we're talking with families as well. And lastly, how the staff interacted with them during their care. So families have described to us this sense that they had that their healthcare provider was very uncomfortable, nervous, not sure what to say. And we know now that that affects all of their future healthcare experiences. So families who lack trust in the healthcare system because of this early loss experience, or because of their infant death experience, it has long-lasting effects. Next slide, please. A lot of what we heard from families and from healthcare providers is about communication. And so we like to talk about communication and needing presence, not perfection. There are no magical words that we can say to families that will make this better for them. And what we really want to do is to help. And so we have a little chart here that maybe you can see on your screen, and that really breaks it down on one column about what is said, what the intended message is, and sometimes what the received message is. We like to let families and healthcare professionals know that anything that starts with "at least" is probably not something that will feel supportive to families. So at least you're still young, you can have other children. Everything will be okay, you'll feel better soon. And sometimes the worst thing of all is saying nothing at all. And so when we look at the intended message of something like, you're still young, you can have more children, then really it's saying that you, it's okay, your body is healthy, there's nothing that will prevent you from having future pregnancies. But how that feels to families sometimes is that you think that I can replace this baby with another baby. And what we wanted was this baby. This baby is treasured and irreplaceable to us. And so while we may go on to have other children, nothing will ever take the place of this baby in our lives and in our hearts. Families being told, at least you can have this, and at least you didn't have to carry for so long. Perhaps there was something wrong. They're trying to say, it's not your fault. I want there to be something good in this for you. And how it feels is minimizing, feeling like they think they know better than we, and that we shouldn't be upset about this. And what's most important for families is validation, that this loss is real, that they're deserving of support and compassion. Next slide, please. So what can we say when families have experienced pregnancy or infant loss? I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we're meeting under these circumstances. Tell me about your baby. Healthcare professionals assuring families that I will answer all of your questions, or I'll find someone who can. Offering to contact someone to come with the family. Oftentimes families are coming for an ultrasound that is run of the mill, usual, nothing has indicated there's anything wrong with this pregnancy, and all of a sudden they're getting horrific news all by themselves. Healthcare professionals who are able to say to families, I can explain this as many times as you need me to, and take all of the time that you need, makes a lot of difference. Next slide, please. So how PAIL Network can help is really with your support of sharing information with families, of making sure that we are known, that peer support is available for you, and that education is available for health and service professionals. Next slide, please. So if you are a professional and you're working with a family who has experienced pregnancy loss, or you're caring for a family at the time of their loss, you can offer them a referral directly to PAIL Network. We're really trying to push for professionals to make these referrals on behalf of a family with their consent, because often what we hear from families is, I wish I had known about this sooner. In my case in particular, we had our loss in August. And it was a friend of a friend who knew someone who experienced a loss that told us about PAIL Network. And that was months afterwards. So for months, we had no idea where to go. I had seen my doctor and got very little information about where to go for help. And so we were on our own and really didn't know where else to go. So when families are able to be offered this referral, whether or not families choose to come for support with PAIL Network, the simple fact that you are offered a referral is validating to you as a bereaved parent, to know that this is a meaningful event, that this deserves support, and that we expect that you'll need support through this. Instead of families having to admit that they need help and then to go looking for the help that they need, makes a big difference in their ability to move through some of that grief in a way that makes sense for them, in a way that connects them with other people who have experienced this loss, decreases the isolation, and increases the chance that they'll be able to incorporate this baby into their lives in a meaningful way. Next slide, please. So we do have a video. Colleen is going to work her magic behind the scenes here to see if we can play it. And this video was filmed 2 years ago with volunteers and patients who experienced loss. And I'll hope that this will bring some of this information to light for you. Thank you.
33 weeks and 4 days. We had a baby girl named Grace.
3 miscarriages, 1 stillbirth. I've had a lot of losses, so I stopped counting at 12.
The first time you say, oh, it's okay, it's only 1, we have hope. Second time you start to question. Third time, it's a chance that you could really fall into that dark space.
These women and families are physically undergoing a stressful experience, but the emotional side of things and the psychological side of things is as important in terms of accessing care and requiring the support.
Pregnancy and infant loss impacts tens of thousands of families in Ontario each year. Skilled and compassionate care matters to families when they are experiencing a pregnancy loss, stillbirth, or infant death. You can make a positive difference with the care you provide.
The doctor that I saw, he spent a lot of time with us, explained everything. And I think we asked him the same questions a lot of times, and you could tell that he wasn't frustrated or anything. He was very calm and with care answered every question that we had. And I think that really helped.
In my experience, what was really helpful was the hugs we received from the healthcare professionals, knowing that they were human too. They sat with us, they cried with us. They held her like she was a new baby. They held her very gently, and that meant a lot to us.
My midwife at the time gave me very detailed and specific information on what I could expect physically, what I could expect emotionally, what I could expect when our baby was delivered. And that was very comforting and helpful to me because I didn't know what to expect. I didn't have any ideas, right?
One of the healthcare providers, I think, remembered my daughter's name, and that was really important to me.
I just had one of the doctors come and stand beside my bed for a good 10 minutes before, and they just said that they were really sorry and just held my hand, and they didn't say anything, but they were there.
One of the problems is that so many times families are not supported. And in particular, when it's an early loss, people just expect you to move on and to get through it and to be okay. And that's not the way it is because you're missing a whole person from your family.
I think there were times where some medical practitioners were coming to us, and I even was thinking maybe they don't know what happened to us. They don't know that we just lost our baby, and that's where they are treating us as if we were any other patient coming for, I don't know, flu or whatever.
When they told me she had passed away, they kind of just said, some baby's heart stopped beating, and walked away.
I think just as a queer person, I, multiple times did not feel sort of on the same level as Liza, like, or sort of spoken to as also the parent, definitely throughout the fertility world, but also at the hospital.
Basically, my baby was described as products. After having a D&C, she had said, oh, we got quite a lot of product. And to me, that was hurtful. My baby wasn't product to me. I know it wasn't her intention, but sometimes terms in the medical community can be quite hurtful when you're dealing with somebody that's dealing with loss.
Although it can feel overwhelming, you don't have to be an expert to make a positive difference. Being kind, tender, and open can go a long way.
No family expects to go through this. Nobody thinks that their baby is going to die. So I think just support. We're not prepared for it, so we don't know what to ask. We don't know what to do.
Be sensitive, because sometimes you just say one word and it's turned everything upside down. And I know that, put yourself in the other person's shoes.
Just making that step to just understand that, yes, this is another patient in that night, and there are other things going on, but to this family, this is the biggest thing to them.
When a person is grieving, don't just do your job. Go above and beyond. Have that light within your heart that you can shine towards somebody at that time of their darkness and despair.
Thank you, Colleen, for sharing that, and apologies for the sound not quite syncing up with the words. I think when we hear from families, that's when we have the best opportunity to learn, and we are certainly grateful for any family who has come forward to talk with us about their loss. Next slide, please. We have a few ways for you to keep in touch. That image that you see there is, I don't know if you heard about the whale Taliqua who lost her baby, and it was a beautiful story of how her pod circled around her. They took turns holding the baby for her while she rested and while she ate, and she was able to spend a number of days with her baby before she let him go. She has recently had another healthy baby, and so we're happy for her, but that was a piece that was in the Globe and Mail written by myself, actually, and that was the image that went along with it. So I'm always happy to hear from you directly at 1-888-303-PAIL. You can always find me through our website, and there we do have a closed private Facebook group that families are welcome to join. So thank you again for having me with you here this evening. I'm looking forward to hearing the rest of the panelists tonight, and I'll be here for Q&A when we're finished. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Before we even get started, I know we're so grateful for everything that the PAIL Network does. Within 2 weeks, I think 2 weeks exactly, we were in our first PAIL meeting, and even watching that video, you get emotional because you recognize some of those families and you know their stories, and some of our favorite people we've met through PAIL. So we're so appreciative for everything that you guys do, and so appreciative to Hospice Simcoe as well for putting this on tonight, and even for your Ended Beginnings program that you started here in Barrie. It just means a lot to us, and I feel like in the 3 years that we've been a part of this community, we're really seeing a lot of change, and so we just wanted to say thank you before we get started. And so to start, I am Theresa Morrison. This is my husband, Matt. We're here as bereaved parents, and then also as the co-founders of Bridget's Bunnies Pregnancy and Infant Loss Foundation. It's a local nonprofit here in Barrie. Our mission is to ensure that no family endures pregnancy or infant loss alone. So a lot of what Michelle spoke about has kind of been our experience as well. And it was one of those things where we just really wanted to make sure that other families didn't have that same loneliness. And that's kind of why we do what we do and why we're here tonight even. So to get started, next slide. In November of 2017, we were eagerly awaiting the birth of our first child. We didn't know what we were having, but we had done everything that we possibly could to prepare for them to arrive. We had taken 2 different pregnancy classes. We had read all of the books. We had had 3 baby showers, and I had done pelvic floor workouts for weeks, months probably leading up to the delivery so that I'd be ready physically. And so as far as we knew, we were ready to have this baby. Everything changed at our last midwife appointment just before her due date. Matt was with me because he never missed an opportunity to hear his baby's heartbeat in these appointments, which unfortunately you don't get in 2020. My mom and my sister-in-law were waiting across the street at Tim Hortons because immediately after this appointment, we were actually going to go and finish off the baby's stocking or Christmas stocking shopping. And then with the midwives themselves, we were discussing all the pros and cons of the different OBs in town and selecting an induction date for just in case we went past due, because at this point we were just shy of 40 weeks. We eventually landed on a Sunday 2 weeks out where Dr. Causey would start my induction and then Dr. Morrow could take over on the Monday if he needed to. Next slide. So it was about an hour after we decided on that Dr. Causey, ironically enough, would be the one showing me the spot on the ultrasound where she should be seeing my baby's heartbeat, and she wasn't. And it was about 30 hours after that Dr. Morrow would be aggressively delivering my placenta following the stillbirth of our beautiful baby girl, Bridget Morrison. After months and months of preparation, absolutely nothing prepared us for this. We thought we were ready, and everything changed. None of our classes or books guided us on to how to select a funeral home or decide between cremation and burial. Nothing explains what to expect when your baby dies. And the hospital staff weren't as helpful as they could have been either. Not only did it take hours after finding out that she had passed to actually be assigned a nurse, once we were assigned a nurse, she was quickly reassigned. Our induction kept being pushed back for live births, and we were often left alone with no guidance at all and made to feel as if we were the only parents who had really been through this situation. Next slide.
Yeah, and so we quickly learned that we weren't the only parents to experience this. As Theresa mentioned, we were introduced to a lot of people at PAIL only 2 weeks later. But in those early hours when we just found out, it was very isolating. We actually didn't know if we had a girl or a boy. It was going to be a surprise. So even though we just found out that we had lost our baby, we were still so excited to meet our baby and find out if it was a girl or boy. We had a girl's name picked right from pretty much from the start. That was the easy one, and we had a few names picked for a boy. And so we were kind of nervous on if it was a boy, we'd have to make a decision pretty quick. But ended up it was a girl. Her name was Bridget. And so in those early moments, we spent a lot of time with them. The priest actually who had married us only a year, just over a year earlier, happened to be on call that night, and so he came in and he was able to do the blessing. And actually, that was our introduction to our family who was waiting for us. It was their introduction to the baby because we knew that it was a girl and its name, but our family had not didn't know yet. So the priest came in and the family followed, and he kind of introduced Bridget for us, and it was a really
emotional.
Yeah, it was a special moment. Sorry.
Yeah.
In the moments after, she was able to meet all of her family. They all got to help hold her. They got to kiss her. We took a lot of photos. We had Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep came in. It's a not-for-profit company that comes in and takes photos for a family when they lose a child. And those are still some photos that we cherish today. We took some videos with our phones, and that's one thing I would recommend to any family ever experiencing this again. Just take videos, photos as many as you can. Next slide. So then when we got home, of course, we left the hospital with empty arms, and as soon as we got in the door, our house just felt so empty as well. I mean, we went through 9 months really getting to know this baby as only we knew this baby. And so now it just had this big empty feeling to it. So came home, house felt empty. My family actually had gone through the house and packed away all of our baby things into the nursery and closed the door. We actually, within hours of being home, went right into the room and grabbed a couple of things that we we felt were something that would bring us some comfort and some memory of Bridget. So we weren't necessarily afraid to go in and get that. And I actually think that it was good that that they didn't remove the things from our house, that we had them here, because after you lose a child, your mind really plays tricks on you on whether you did know that you were going to bring a child home or not. And so that was just a reminder that, yeah, we were preparing. We had our crib, we had a bassinet, we had, diapers, we had everything that we needed. We had a crib built. So it's, I think it was important for them not to be removed from the house. Family also did amazing things like packed our fridge with food and our cupboards, booked us a housekeeper. Yeah, it was just things that would offer us some comfort. And so in this picture actually that we're showing is are things that actually were buried with Bridget. So that bear was given to us right after she was born by her aunt. The blanket was just a nice blanket they were excited to use. And the book was a book that I read most nights to her when she was in the womb. So we wrote a nice message and that went with her as well. Next slide. So next came the funeral planning. So right when, actually not even next, so right when the baby's born, you get to decide whether you're going to bury them, or you're going to cremate them. You have to pick a funeral home. They come at you with all of these things that you, like hours before, you had no idea you had to decide on. That's before the baby's even born. So we ended up deciding on a funeral home and having Bridget buried. And we were deciding between a spot that was specific for babies or a family plot. We ended up going with a family plot, so Theresa and I will eventually be buried with Bridget there as well. And then actually a connection to our wedding, only a little over a year before that, we only knew one florist, so we asked that florist to do our funeral for Bridget as well. And thankfully they did. That's not their specialty, but it ended up, as you can see, it was absolutely beautiful. So another thing that kind of was interesting, I think that everyone involved that was planning the funeral didn't necessarily recognize that we may want to speak at the funeral. They thought that we just were in so much shock and grief that we wouldn't be able to speak. And we actually had to interrupt the ending of the funeral to make sure that we got to say a few words, because like I kind of mentioned before, we developed this bond with Bridget over 9 months that nobody else had with Bridget. And so we really felt like we needed to share some stories. So we had some fairly specific stories that and experiences that we shared as a family, and we felt like it was important for us to speak about those and to share those with our family. After the funeral, it's amazing the feeling of exhaustion. I don't think I've ever felt as exhausted as I did after we left the cemetery. We live about 7 minutes from the cemetery, and in the ride home, Theresa and I both fell asleep in the car. Like, we were just totally exhausted. So as soon as we got home, we went straight to our bedrooms and just kind of relaxed for a bit as our house filled up with people. I don't think I've ever seen that many people in my house. I don't think I ever will again, hopefully. But I think we broke some fire codes that night. But we did what you do after a funeral. We served food and entertained the people who came to celebrate Bridget with us. And yeah, I think really what we want to express is that when a baby dies, it's not just that a baby dies. It's an important person in the family, and that's really important to us. Next slide.
Yeah. So this is just a picture of what we went home with. And so it's one of those things that in the moment, like, we were so grateful for. Like, they had these little kits available for us. They took her little like hand and footprints. If you've seen anything that we do with Bridget's Bunnies, we use her actual footprints in our branding as well. Like, the midwives were so great about taking like her little like sample of her hair, like a little curl. We were able to go home with photos. and things like that. So it was really sweet as far as like they were helping us do some of this memory making. And I think that there was like a very deliberate effort made to like help us with that and to make sure that like we did go home with something. I think that what we found, so even like they gave us printed resources, but like those resources were a bit outdated. So like we knew that they were on like the old branding for the hospital and things like that. So there was like, the effort was definitely there, but there was also a disconnect. Like there was like things that needed to be done that kind of clean it up. So when I saw like this list of resources, I'm not even sure that PAIL was on it. I feel like it was like whatever PAIL was before PAIL Network. Like it was just like, it was very outdated information. Like, again, we recognize the branding as being older branding. And there was little things like that, that like, well, the individuals that we were working with were doing everything that they could. And they as individuals were amazing. Like, I think as a whole, pregnancy and infant loss just weren't being properly addressed, like kind of more at an administrative level, and making sure that like the program was really well run. And so next slide, our goal was to really send people home with like a toolkit, like, and so like right away, like I can't take credit for like the resources. I know the clerk on the floor, like when, sorry, so we reached out to RVH. We told them kind of what our feedback was. We, like to the hospital that we delivered at, we sat down with the manager and went through some of the challenges that we faced with them. And then also like we knew as a family that we really wanted Bridget's life to be more than just her death. Like we knew that she would have an impact on the world, and that it was now up to us to kind of do that. And so that's where we came up with, we wanted to be able to reach these families in their moment of crisis. And we didn't, like, we knew that we physically couldn't be there to do that. Like we wanted them to know that they weren't alone. We wanted them to know immediately that they weren't alone. And that's where these comfort kits came in. And so with that, in addition to any memory making that would already be done at the hospital, we had our own memory makers added. So we had like the clay hand and footprint molds that we included so that they could have something a little bit more tangible. We included a children's book. As Matt said, like he read to her every single night when she was alive in my belly, and like never missed a night. And then we had her in our arms, and it never occurred to us to pick up a book and read it to her. And so that's one of those things that for the rest of our lives, we'll know that we never actually looked at our little girl and read her a story. And so we just like, we're trying to include some of those items to give families the tools and the prompts to tell them like, this is normal. Even if the baby has already passed, it's normal to sit down and kind of capture those memories, or like create those memories with them. We include the bunnies because like we said, you go home with empty arms and your arms are just aching to hold something. And so why not have it be a bunny? The bunny is actually one of the items that we pulled out of the nursery on that first day when we came home, was her little Jellycat bunny that was given to us by a friend. And so we include bunnies for any of the parents who are receiving one of these kits. We include a book about pregnancy and infant loss specific, so that any of those like crazy thoughts that you think that you're having, this will help address those and let you know that you're actually you're not off base. Like everybody kind of goes through this, or everything, like really anything that you're feeling is normal. We include sage tea. So the intention with the sage tea is to help decrease mom's milk supply, because a lot of the time after you give birth, your milk still comes in. Your body doesn't know. Like as smart as our bodies are, they don't know that the baby's died, and it's still preparing for you to take care of this child. And so the sage tea is supposed to help suppress that. And so really what we consider these our toolboxes, really. Like we want them to be like more than just a comfort kit. It's kind of a toolkit that parents can go home with. We put them in a clear box so that even if like they just come home, throw it in a corner, a family member might see it and then know to pick it up and like go through it. Like it's intended so that people can really get their hands on it and look through it, hopefully at some point, and utilize it in some way. And that's kind of our intention with that. I know we're coming up on 7 o'clock in the wave of light, so I don't know if Tennille wants to jump in and say anything.
Yes, thank you. So as I mentioned at the very beginning, at 7 o'clock, it is the wave of light. So we invite anyone to light a candle now if they're wanting to take part in the global wave of light. So feel free to light a candle and leave it burning for at least 1 hour. Again, this is just to remember all babies that have died too soon. I did also grab a small quote home from the Let's Talk Pregnancy Loss Instagram page. So as you light your candle, I am going to read this poem. So we remember the babies born sleeping, those we carried but never held, those we held but could not take home, those who came home but could not stay. So again, we thank you for spending October 15th with us, and we acknowledge the huge grief that some of you have experienced. And I'll pass it back to you, Theresa and Mathew.
I think we can go to the next slide. So in addition to, with Bridget's Bunnies, we do the comfort kits that I just spoke about. And that was kind of to meet people in their moment of crisis and to really help families right at that first moment, to help get them through those first hours and days and weeks, to immediately let them know that they're not alone, immediately let them know some of the tools that helped us. Everything in those kits has been gifted to us. And so we just wanted to pay that forward. This isn't 2020. I made an error. It's actually 2019. We are not gathered like this in 2020. Don't worry. But this is Bridget's Run 2019. And we did Bridget's Run 2018, and we're doing Bridget's Run 2020 this year. And so the intention with this, just like what Michelle was talking about with the events that PAIL puts on, we really want to bring people together and let them see that they have this huge community around them. Yeah, I think like it's an opportunity, like we found even for ourselves, it's an opportunity for like friends and family, and even like those people who are like a little bit more distant from you, who haven't had a chance to really acknowledge your baby or acknowledge what's taken place. It makes it really easy for them. You can come out to this fun event. Tons of people come out to it. Like there's all these other like families there, and it doesn't get too emotional. It's just something like where you can actually come out and celebrate. Like the idea is that like you can bring out whoever you want and celebrate with them. The other piece of it is, and our hope is that, and I've heard from families even in the community, that even if they themselves aren't comfortable coming out and mentioning their babies or talking about their losses for whatever reason, they just appreciate that something like this exists. They see that like the politicians come out, they see the healthcare workers come out, they see the community in general just like come out and show full support. And so that's really our intention with Bridget's Run, is just to help like in another way break down those barriers. And even like for families year after year to be able to come out, like we were going back through photos recently, and it's amazing from 2018, people that we didn't know then who we would consider friends now, and like you just like you don't know who you're going to meet along this journey, and like some of the most amazing people have come forward and really become like an important part of our lives. And so that's really the intention with Bridget's Run. If you're listening, it's taking place on October 17th this year. Again, we're not meeting in person, but we're trying as hard as we can virtually to try like to really like recreate that community and make sure that people, even if you're walking or running alone in memory of your own child, like know that there are other people on that day who are going through something similar to you. Like everyone's loss is unique. And at the same time, like we're all in this together. And so with that, yeah, our goal is just really to try to ensure that nobody endures pregnancy or infant loss alone. And that's just another way that we try to accomplish that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Theresa and Mathew. My name's Trish, and I'm a volunteer at Hospice. And in my work life, I was a registered nurse and then a registered midwife. So I'm just going to talk a minute about, for some of you, or for some of those you're supporting, what might come next. And that's considering another pregnancy when loss of a pregnancy or death of a baby has happened. It's a big deal. So Inner Beginnings is the perinatal bereavement program at Hospice Simcoe. And we'd just like to acknowledge and take the opportunity to support you and acknowledge your loss. And our goal is to spend time with you and listen as you grieve and possibly consider another pregnancy and baby. And how you feel about what has happened to you and what the future might bring depends on so many things. A lot of it is quite individual, and then some of it is that you'll share it. It'll be something that folks who are in your same situation will also have experienced. But some of the things that do come to mind is that if you were the person who was pregnant, that's really common to blame yourself, that something you did or did not do caused the loss, that you may be feeling apprehensive that the day-to-day decisions you make about life and lifestyle are life-altering, and you will often set yourself the impossible goal of getting it perfect this time. For some of us, reaching this time of year or stage of pregnancy when loss occurred may be really difficult with the subsequent pregnancy or baby, because the pain and fear of what happened before can really occupy your mind. Sleeplessness, anxiety, lashing out, irritability, sadness. Another one that comes up for some is that when you get to those significant family events, the big family stuff where you expected all the family members to be present, and that included that baby that didn't survive. So you'll find that there's joy with the whole family, but there's always that sense of something missing. For some, there's just the pressure that there's a biological clock ticking, and it feels like you have to put grief on hold in order to focus on another pregnancy or baby because time is progressing. But deep down, the hard part is grief is there, and although it may be put on hold, it has not gone away. There's also a fear that often the subsequent pregnancy or baby might mean you're risking not remembering and honoring the life and memory of the previous pregnancy or baby, that you might worry that you might forget the details of the brief time you had together. As Theresa and Matt said, the importance of those physical mementos of that time with that baby. If it's a pregnancy loss, that's harder because you don't have even those mementos. But it's that fear of not forgetting that baby, and you won't, but it feels like it could happen. Sometimes there's just sadness that knowing that, not sadness, but you'll feel that sadness will be part of the next pregnancy. And it's hard because you want the next pregnancy and baby to be nothing but joyous, but understanding that grief and loss has been a part of your life and your family. And so that's going to be there too. One of the real challenges can be what you need from your healthcare provider this time will be different because of your experience of loss, and figuring out how to meet your needs and how to communicate this to your healthcare provider so you understand each other. And healthcare providers are like all people, they're works in progress. Some people get it, some will really be able to, and others not so much. And so it's difficult depending on who you're matched with as you go through that next pregnancy. Certainly, as part of a couple, one of the things that can be challenging around the experience of loss and the expression of grief is that if you and your partner could be in very different places. So you're wondering, are we in the right place to consider another pregnancy and baby? And where is that? How would we know? What can we expect from ourselves and each other? What's normal? Most of what I mentioned applies to partners, but in addition, sometimes partners and couples that have lost a pregnancy and a baby may have been so focused on supporting the mom that being strong and not really needing anything, that they didn't have or take the opportunity to feel and understand what the pregnancy loss or death of the baby meant for you. And deep down, even though we know that grief is there and it may have been put on hold, it hasn't gone away. So considering another pregnancy and baby is challenging for partners as well. For those of us with anxiety or depression or trauma as part of our lives before this loss occurred, it can take time to understand how we're coping given this, and whether we need additional support from our healthcare providers. So those are just some of the things that you may find yourself experiencing and thinking about. Honestly, I came up with this really just based on my time with people. I've worked in maternal child health I did it for most of my working life, and particularly the last almost 20 years as a midwife. And all of this just came from going through experiences with people and trying to become more aware. But there will be other things that will happen that will be uniquely yours. Talking with others about your experience of losing a pregnancy or a baby will probably bring others forward. So if Hospice Simcoe and Ended Beginnings can provide support, we would be really honored to do so. We do virtually meet one-on-one. The trained volunteers meet with those that have experienced loss. We're just starting to get to the idea of joining a group that would be facilitated by a Hospice Simcoe staff person and then one of the volunteers. And again, at this point, that will be virtual. So thank you very much for listening and being present. And thank you for allowing us the opportunity to listen and support you as you travel through this path of your life. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, Trish. So thank you to Michelle, Trish, Theresa, and Mathew for sharing all that information and for being so vulnerable and open with us as well. I really appreciate it. I also wanted to say a quick thank you to Colleen, who's working in the background right now with the PowerPoint and making sure that things run smoothly. So thank you for that. We are going to open it up for discussion. So if anyone has any questions, please type them in the Q&A chat window at the bottom. We'll try our hardest to answer everything. I will start with one question here. So, are there doctors who specialize in miscarriages, and how do I get referred to them?
I might be able to answer that. I could, well, a little bit. Yes and no. And typically what would happen, it depends on how many losses you had, and that sounds a bit on the brutal side, but just referencing the information from PAIL Network earlier, if 1 in 4 pregnancies ends in loss, in some ways it's a common thing to happen. So there are obstetrician gynecologists who will see women who have complex history around loss, multiple losses, or if there's anything going on in terms of how, at what stage in the pregnancy the loss occurred. So yes, that can happen.
Thank you, Trish.
So just talk, if I should probably just add, so just if you're seeing a physician or a midwife in the beginning, you know, or even planning, then that's the time to ask them, how would this work for me? And they might sit and take a few minutes and talk to you about what's gone on in your life and what makes the most sense. Yep. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so after a miscarriage, when can I try for another baby?
I'll tackle that one a little bit. I probably referenced the last question and answer, which is a little bit, does depend on what was going on, what, you know, when you had the previous loss. Usually I would expect that if there was something that your care provider wanted to say to you about looking further at the circumstances of that loss, and it might take some time to, you know, maybe do some tests or that sort of thing, then there might be a time when there's a window where you might consider, let's figure some more things out before you go on to another pregnancy. The majority of the time, especially with miscarriage, and the earlier it happens, it is that is less likely. And it really is up to you. It used to be that there was always this certain amount of time that you needed to wait. That's around kind of the physical part of being pregnant. But then there's the emotional part of knowing readiness. And that's pretty personal. I wondered if anybody else wanted to add to that aspect of planning another baby. Yeah.
So I want to jump in only because we were told by one of our care providers that 6 to 12 months, like, so following, like, so we actually had a miscarriage and then followed by a stillbirth, but with Bridget, we were told 6 to 12 months to kind of recover emotionally as well. And I would say that's where it has to be completely personal. So we were pregnant about 4 months later. And I feel like, so we're pregnant again now. And I would say that this pregnancy has actually been harder than that first pregnancy. So I don't know that time really helps with any of that. So like, I think like there's absolutely a physical component. There's absolutely a medical component where you need to work with your care providers. But I think if anyone's advising you as far as like emotionally, mentally, like you kind of have to just judge for yourself where you're at as an individual and know that they're just doing the best they can with the information that they have, but they don't really know your personal situation. And yeah, like I would say like that, like those old rules of 6 to 12, or if that's even still something that people say, I would kind of throw it out the window and just do what works for you and your family.
It's never going to be easy, no matter if it's within 4 months or 6 months or 12 months. You're still going to be grieving your other baby or babies, and it doesn't matter. Like 6 months, 4 months, 2 months, you're still grieving your baby.
Yeah.
If I can add to that as well, I feel like that's such an important question that families will ask after their loss about when is it okay to try again? And I really enjoyed that we had both kind of the medical piece of it and the psychosocial piece of it. And one of the things that we have also learned from families that can be really helpful when you're considering a pregnancy after a baby has died is to really understand the kind of care that you can expect from your primary care provider in that subsequent pregnancy. So sometimes that might help you to understand when you might be ready for that. If you know that you are now going to be referred to a high-risk clinic, for example, or if you're going to receive specialized care in your subsequent pregnancy, that could change your decision in terms of readiness. Or if you aren't going to be, then is there something you can talk to either your doctor, your obstetrician, or your midwife about how frequent when your visits happen. A lot of families really feel that they want to be seen more often and they need a lot more reassurance during their second pregnancy. Or for me, it was my second pregnancy. So if it's the pregnancy that you're having after your loss, and some of those earlier questions about what will this be like could be helpful for you.
I'm not entirely sure how this works for my midwife colleagues during the pandemic, but for previously, I would quite typically say to someone who, if at 18 weeks on the previous baby, we couldn't find a heartbeat, then I'd kind of say to them, if you need to call every day and come in and listen and hear from the baby, that will make you feel better, those kind of opportunities, just so that it doesn't make it easier, but if that helps, then that's a-okay. So there's that kind of, trying to figure out what will help. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone. So another question here. Do you have any books or resources that you suggest around infant loss? Sorry.
That would probably be a big yes. And I see that Bridget's Bunnies has done an amazing job of curating some beautiful books that have been helpful for families. And we would agree with all of those same choices. I think my overall comment would really be it depends. It depends on the kind of book that you're looking for. So some families, if you're like me and you're a reader and you just want to devour any information that's out there, things that have been published by other bereaved parents are sometimes really helpful to read and to understand those perspectives. If you're looking for something that really talks about grief more in general, then looking at those kind of grief and bereavement specialists like Alan Wolfeld, for example, has written some exceptionally useful books about different topics surrounding grief, including pregnancy and infant loss. But I think it would really depend on the kind of information that you're looking for, and the books that other families have read are often the best ones that can be recommended.
And I would just add to that, like if anybody, like I can't think of the titles off the top of my head right now, but like if you were looking for recommendations, like we can talk it through too if you wanted to reach out, because I know like I've read quite a few of them. There's not a lot. I won't say there's a lot, but there's more than I expected to find, books specific for pregnancy and infant loss and from different perspectives. there's a number that are faith-based, so it really depends on what you're looking for. If that's something, I like kind of the more like we include Empty Cradle, Broken Heart, and I feel like it almost reads like a textbook for me, and so I really enjoyed that. And then
we have like grieving dads, like we have specific for dads and grandparents. We have grandparents books too. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a number of them. And then even like the other, like some of the other books that I found to be helpful, some of the authors, like it won't be specific to pregnancy and infant loss, but even I find like Young Widows are sometimes really on point with like how I'm feeling. And so like, it's good too, to kind of branch out, like Michelle was saying, just even to just general grief books and like what it looks like to grieve and how it feels. I don't know. I know like that's a very like broad answer, but yeah, if you want specific titles, like you can reach out and we can chat.
Perfect. Theresa and Mathew, are you comfortable putting your contact information in the chat window, just in case people are wanting to reach out to you in regards to resources?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
And I believe Hospice has Ended Beginnings has a book list, a resource list available as well.
Perfect. Perfect. I will make sure at the end of this event as well, I will put Colleen as well as Doris's contact information in the chat window for individuals who are looking for some additional support or resources as well. Another question. So relationship is struggling after. Is this common, and do you have any suggestions?
I'm kind of looking over at Theresa and Mathew now. We're all smiling like, Who wants to tackle that one first? I'll let you guys go ahead.
I just said I think that one's for us. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, from the husband and father's point of view, I think it was really difficult. There were a lot of moments that were really difficult where Theresa might be really upset, and I just didn't know how to handle that, or I didn't know what she was upset about. Sometimes I thought she was angry with me, and she wasn't angry with me at all, but that creates a whole other argument on top of the way she's already feeling. So we definitely had our struggles. We definitely talked to some professionals. We had some counseling, and I think that's really important. I think that's one thing actually we struggle with with our organization, is that we put out this happy smiling face, like everything is fantastic for us, but really it's not. Even like, I mean, even last week, like putting this run together, we have tough moments where we're really feeling it emotionally, and it's hard to communicate that with each other, exactly how we're feeling, and sometimes we don't even know how we're feeling. And so definitely it affects the relationship for sure. But yeah.
Yeah, and I would have to agree. Like, and we like even our approach to, like, I think like we actually I do feel like, especially in the beginning, we were really strong, like where we were leaning on each other quite a bit. But I think we were definitely dealing with different like emotions as far as what we were feeling. So I think as the mom, like I felt like a lot of guilt and shame, and like a lot, like I was just like so driven to kind of find like as much information about like Bridget's specific cause of death as I could. And so she died as a result of an umbilical cord accident. And I remember one day I asked Matt to look something up or something, and he didn't know how to spell umbilical cord. And I was like, how have you not typed that into like Google like a million times in the last week? Like, it's just like those things like where you're really like just on two different like wavelengths, I think, as far as like how you're processing things. And yeah, it's hard. And I don't know that there's like one right answer for anybody. Like we still have recently like talked to a counselor, like, because it's ongoing too. Like it doesn't necessarily, like maybe it will, but like it doesn't necessarily go away. Like there's still kind of those lingering points. So I don't know, like all I can say is like you have to be as open and like communicate as clearly as you can. Like one of the things, so like something that Matt mentioned earlier was like the idea of like when we would see things around the house that meant that like we knew that we were going to have a baby and bring the baby home. We were both kind of juggling with this thought that like we weren't expecting, like, so after she died, we were both just like, oh, I guess like we just always knew that she was going to die. Like I never expected to bring her home. Like you kind of like convince yourself of that. And we were both really struggling with this thought. And I can't remember who said it first, but one of us said it to the other. And it was one of those things where like, I feel like it bonded us a bit because we were both feeling this like crazy thought that like we knew wasn't rational, but at the same time was like killing us. Like, and yeah, so I would just say like, try to be as open as possible and try to be as like forgiving as possible too. I guess if your partner's not really responding in the way that you need them to, but then also look for like what you need in that conversation or in that relationship. I don't know. We're not experts, but yeah, if you're struggling, it's normal. I don't know. Like, I guess that's the bottom line.
Yeah, that sounds very good. Mm-hmm.
I feel like something that I learned, so we're 15 years out from our bereavement. And, you know, further to Theresa's comment, yeah, I don't know if it's going to get better, if it gets different. I mean, I think that's really the only way to talk about, you know, the relationship changes that happen after you've lost a baby. And one of the things that we have kind of come to learn that I think I wish I knew, I think that's something that anyone who's had a loss will probably say lots of times. I wish I had known that earlier. I wish someone had told me that. And one of the things that we learned that was really helpful in our relationship was about the different kinds of grievers, that there's ways to express grief that can feel very different. And if you're able to understand whether someone is an intuitive griever, so that's someone who feels their emotions deeply, expresses their emotions out loud, is really in tune with how this is experiencing for them on really kind of an emotional level, then that might be someone who cries more, someone who writes in a journal and wants to talk about it, plays sad music in the house and really wants to be in touch with that. Conversely, if you're an instrumental griever, those tend to be people who need to do something. So we need to start a foundation. We need to build something in her honor. There's action and energy that comes with that grief. And once I had learned that and understood that, when I reflected on the earlier days when my husband and I were just in two very different places, I feel like that could have been really helpful for me to think like, okay, he's doing a million chores around the house while I lay here sobbing, because that's the difference. That's how he needs to do this. And that's not, if someone had asked me in those early days to go and be productive and do something, I don't think I could have even put one foot in front of the other. It was good enough for me to get dressed, and that happened infrequently as well. So there's absolutely that understanding what grief can look like in your partner. It was something that was really helpful, and then being able to identify with that and perhaps try and join them in that and explain to them what's happening with you. So it takes a lot of energy. It's very, very challenging, I think, for relationships to be able to not only process their own emotions, but try to understand their partner's emotions as well. And so sometimes peer support is a great thing to be able to hear someone else talk about the struggles they're having. I think it's really a lot about that normalizing and understand this is a typical reaction to what you've experienced. But certainly looking for external support from a therapist, from a counselor. If your relationship is struggling, then that's always a good idea.
I just wanted to add too that especially if the loss is a miscarriage that happens and it's fairly early, even before the pregnancy may be physically visible to others, then in a couple, especially I think in a male-female couple, that we know that the sense of pregnancy and what's coming is different for one partner versus the other. We know that lots of people have dreams about the baby who's coming in pregnancy. And in a male-female couple, men often dream of a child who's young but walking and talking. And women often will dream about infants. And so that sort of, if the pregnancy is lost early on, before it's really become visible, then sometimes the partners are in very different places, just as you said, Michelle, about how they express it. But it's also just the whole process of kind of getting there and going, the feeling of what have I lost? It just takes time to sort of develop and settle in, and the wholeness and the bigness of what's happened is there's the initial sort of shock, but then it's just that growing sense of, okay, this is, as you said, it's a big and forever part of my life. And what will it be like? And knowing that the pacing between partners in a couple, that it's always different in terms of how you look at it. The hope is that every once in a while you figure out the way to connect so that you both share that, as you and Theresa and Mathew, as you said, we both had a crazy thought and then said to the other person, I had this crazy thought. So it's that trying to find those moments. And yeah, therapists can be wonderfully helpful if that's what it takes. And that's a really good plan. Yeah.
Perfect. So we have one more question here. So this is the last one. So going back to the question about resources. So are there resources to help explain infant loss to young siblings like toddlers?
PAIL Network has a booklet called Supporting Siblings. And in that booklet, we were able to break it down developmentally by age so that can give families some cues about how to talk about that and some guidance about where children are at developmentally. And also to recognize that will change over time. So when you're explaining an infant loss or a pregnancy loss to a toddler, then you'll be having that conversation likely for the rest of their lives, and their questions will change as their understanding changes with their development. In terms of other resources, I'll let Theresa and Mathew speak about this as well, because they have experience in this kind of area too. But I think what we found was difficult was, again, finding just the right resource. And so looking around and seeing what other parents have used, a lot of books talk about babies who have died and describe them as angels. And sometimes that can be off-putting for families. And so looking for a resource, at PAIL Network, we tend to just look at resources that are describing lasting connections, how to build those connections, and knowing that we can give support to families as they're having ongoing conversations.
Sorry, I just realized I can't remember that, I'm drawing blanks on all of this. So I know one of the resources that we got was we were expecting a baby and we got an angel instead. So it really breaks it down. But yeah, it's faith-based, and so wouldn't work for everybody. I'm trying to think of what we have in the house. We have the story of death, I think, is one that we keep in the house and that we read to Jocelyn. And so it's not even specific to pregnancy and infant loss, but it does reference them. It talks about loss in general and kind of like how life and death work together. Rabbityness is one that I would say is more like toddler level. And all of, most of the resources that we found as far as for kids, there's another one, When Dinosaurs Die. I think that one's a bit older, but it kind of addresses the different faiths and the approaches, but it also kind of takes a more secular view too. It just kind of covers off on all those bases. And then there's a website. So it's a family that had lost, I think their toddler. And so he had a twin brother. And so it's for Jude for everyone. I can type that out too, if I can just make sure that I find the correct resource. But I know they have a book review that they did because they received so many books for their surviving son. And so they did a whole book review, and we kind of went through that and ordered a bunch and went through them to see what works. And really, I think it's going to come down to whatever works for your family. But yeah, I don't know. We're just so Jocelyn's young, so she's not even 2 yet. And we're still just trying to introduce the conversation so that it's not hopefully a shock to her in the future. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know if that helps at all.
And if you go to the speak to one of the children's librarians at the Barrie Public Library. They'll direct you to the books that they have. And I think they've got a pretty good selection of books for loss in general, but also the loss of a sibling. And I think it's the whole age range from toddlers on up. So you may find something quite good there.
Great, thank you. All right, so that were all the questions. So thank you to the 4 of you for answering them and for everyone that had questions that were asked. I'm just going to do a quick poll to evaluate, and then we will pull things to a close. So you'll see it pop up on your screen. Just take a couple seconds to fill that out for us, please. Wonderful. So I'm going to close that. Perfect. So I again want to say thank you to the 4 of you and also to Colleen, who's working in the background there. As mentioned a few times, if you are wanting more information, please contact Hospice. I've put in the chat window there Doris and Colleen's email addresses. Trish had mentioned our End of Beginnings program, which is specifically for pregnancy and infant loss. So we do have that available to individuals who have experienced that loss. We also have started a virtual memorial wall for the month of October. So we welcome you to participate in that if you're wanting to. It's available to anyone impacted by pregnancy and infant loss. So you can write stories, you can add photos, you could even add a photo of your candle that's lit tonight if you feel comfortable doing so. So we welcome you to do that. Again, if you're wanting access to the PowerPoints, please send Doris an email in the chat box. And besides that, we are very thankful that you've decided to spend October 15th with us, and we thank you for attending. Thank you, everybody.
Good night, everybody.